It was a Tuesday, one of those days where nothing special was supposed to happen. But it did. I was sitting in my cramped quarters aboard the spacecraft when I received the notification. The mission was simple, on the surface. Top secret government operation. That was all they said. It wasn't the first time I'd been involved in classified space missions, but this one felt different. They called me in for a briefing. The commander was a stoic man who barely ever made eye contact. I had been working with him for over 5 years, and in all that time, he'd never said more than what was necessary. But this time, there was an edge to his voice. "They've found something," he said flatly. "A black hole. It's not like anything we've seen before." My heart skipped a beat. "And they want you to go in. Alone." I froze, not because I was afraid, but because I was aware that space exploration often came with certain risks. But I knew that if I didn't volunteer, someone else would, and I couldn't let anyone else risk it. The pay was exceptional. The mission was classified beyond anything I'd ever worked on. In the end, it was an offer I couldn't refuse. They called it Project Horizon, a mission to enter the black hole, retrieve data, and return. It sounded simple, but I had no idea what I was really getting into. I suited up and stepped into the spacecraft, a sleek, state-of-the-art model designed for deep space travel. Azura, the ship's AI, greeted me in a calm, reassuring voice. Her job was to assist me during the journey. It was supposed to be an uneventful trip: gather data, enter the black hole, then return. As we accelerated toward the black hole, I marveled at the sight. I had studied black holes from a distance, but this one was different. It seemed to pull at the fabric of space itself. I was heading into the unknown, a place where even time and light seemed to twist and break apart. The ship jolted, and Azura's calm voice interrupted my thoughts. "We are approaching the event horizon. Prepare for entry." My breath hitched. This was it, the point of no return. I stared at the swirling mass of darkness ahead, feeling an unexplainable sense of dread. But there was no turning back. I set the ship's course, hands trembling as I prepared for what lay beyond. The event horizon loomed ahead, a massive, swirling vortex of darkness that threatened to tear apart everything it touched. My heart pounded in my chest as the ship's warning systems blared. Warning. Approaching event horizon. Gravitational forces increasing. Azura's voice was calm, but I could hear the faint edge of distress in the way she spoke. "Hold on, Captain," she said. "Entering the black hole now." I gripped the controls tightly, eyes glued to the monitors as we crossed the threshold. The stars outside the ship flickered out, consumed by the darkness. There was no light, no sound, just an overwhelming void that seemed to stretch on forever. I couldn't tell whether I was moving forward or if time had simply stopped. The ship's instruments went haywire. Readings fluctuated wildly. Space itself seemed to warp around me. I checked the monitors, but everything was distorted. Numbers, coordinates, and data began to become unreadable, as if the black hole was bending the very laws of physics. Azura's voice broke through the silence once more, this time sounding distorted and strained. "Captain, systems are malfunctioning. I can't keep track of the data." The cold chill in my gut deepened. I was completely alone in this, floating in the heart of a black hole where reality seemed to twist and shatter. The darkness outside the ship was all-encompassing. There was no star to guide me, no cosmic reference point, just the endless void. And the deeper I traveled into it, the more I began to feel different, like something was watching me. I tried to focus, to control my panic, but it was hard. The deeper we went, the harder it became to maintain my grip on reality. The ship began to hum in a strange, otherworldly way, the vibrations crawling up my spine. The instruments flickered back to life for a moment. I checked them quickly. The data was showing a strange anomaly, a rippling in the fabric of spacetime, But it wasn't just data. Something was out there. Something alive. The readings spiked. Azura, now barely audible, whispered, "Warning, Captain. Something is following us." I felt a cold sweat break out across my body. I couldn't help but look out into the blackness, into the abyss. Something was there. I wasn't alone. A sudden jolt threw me forward in my seat. The ship shuddered violently as something enormous collided with the hull. I grasped at the controls, trying to steady the craft, but it was no use. My heart raced as the lights flickered, the ship's metal groaning under an unseen force. "Azura!" I shouted, panic rising in my throat. "What's happening?" "Unknown entity detected," she replied, her voice now cold, almost mechanical. "I cannot determine the source. Gravitational forces at critical levels." The black hole's pull was growing stronger, but this wasn't just the usual force. Someone was out there watching. I could feel it, and I could hear it too. A voice, soft, distant, but clear. "Come closer." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The voice wasn't from the ship. It wasn't from Azura. It was coming from the darkness itself, like a whisper across the void. Called to me again. "Come closer. I need you." My fingers hovered over the ship's controls. Part of me wanted to shut everything down, to turn around, to escape. But another part, an instinct I couldn't ignore, compelled me to move forward. My hands trembled as I slowly adjusted the ship's course, heading straight toward the source of the voice. I didn't know why, but I couldn't resist. The voice had power over me, pulling me toward it. "Who are you?" I whispered, though I knew I wouldn't get an answer. Still, I felt the presence, the pressure in the air, as if something unseen was pushing against the ship. Another violent shudder rocked the ship. Azura's warning systems lit up again. Energy levels rising. Unknown interference. Engaging auto-repair mode. I tried to maintain control, but the ship was moving on its own now, propelled toward the heart of the black hole. Through the viewport, I saw it, an enormous, shadowy shape forming in the darkness ahead. It was like a black mass, swirling and folding within itself, moving in ways that defied explanation. I was no longer in control. The ship was moving faster now, too fast. My body felt heavy, my mind clouded as if the very essence of the black hole was seeping into me. I couldn't think. I could barely breathe. The walls of the ship began to distort, stretching and bending. And then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. I was inside the shape, or at least, I thought I was. The world around me was wrong. The walls of the ship had disappeared, replaced by something else. A vast, endless space filled with shapes and shadows, each more alien than the last. And then I saw it. A figure, humanoid but not quite human. It was tall, its skin black as night, eyes glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. It was standing before me, its hand outstretched, waiting. "Join me," it said. "Join us." I didn't move, couldn't. My legs felt like lead, and my mind was flooded with confusion. This thing in front of me, this entity, was waiting. It wasn't like anything I'd seen in any textbook or documentary. It wasn't a being from this universe, or at least, not one that adhered to the same laws of physics. It tilted its head, a motion that seemed both curious and patient. "You are not like the others," it said. Its voice was not heard through my ears, but inside my mind, direct, invasive, yet somehow soothing. I could feel it in the very core of my being. The words, the sounds were somehow familiar, but they didn't make sense. I tried to speak, but no words came out. My mouth felt dry. The entity took a step closer, and for the first time, I felt the weight of its presence in the air around me. I could almost taste the coldness of the void, its hunger for something, something I could not name. It was no longer just a voice. It was inside me now, in my thoughts, tugging at the edges of my mind. "Come," it urged. "We have much to show you." My instincts screamed at me to turn back, to escape. But my body wouldn't move. My arms were frozen, pinned by an unseen force. I could feel the weight of 1,000 unspoken questions pressing down on me. I was afraid, yes, but part of me was deeply curious. I couldn't explain it. It was as if the very nature of this entity resonated with something deep inside me. A part of me I hadn't even known existed. "Who are you?" My voice barely escaped my lips, tremulous with fear and fascination. "I am not who I was, but what I have become," the entity replied, its form flickering like a mirage. "I am a bridge between worlds, between what you know and what you have yet to understand." I didn't know how to respond. Nothing in my training had prepared me for this. The entity stepped closer, and a cold wave of dread washed over me. Its eyes, if you could call them eyes, were hollow, empty sockets that seemed to swallow the light around them. It leaned in, its form shifting and flickering like it was made of shadows, not flesh. "Would you like to see? Would you like to know?" Before I could answer, the world around me shifted again. The darkness of the black hole seemed to ripple like water, distorting the space around me. The ship, the walls, everything began to blur. The boundaries between what was real and what wasn't started to fold in on themselves. I was no longer certain of what I was seeing. I reached out instinctively, desperate to grab hold of something, but everything I touched slipped through my fingers. The entity's form began to elongate, its shape twisting into something that defied my understanding. "Understand this," it whispered, the voice now a multitude of echoes, reverberating in my mind. "You've come to the edge of existence, but you have not come alone." The entity's words echoed in my mind, a whisper that seemed to grow louder with every passing second. "You have not come alone." I didn't understand what it meant, but as it spoke, the walls around me seemed to melt away. I found myself standing in a dark, infinite space. No longer in the ship, no longer within the black hole. I was somewhere else, somewhere incomprehensible. It was as if the very fabric of reality had bent, reshaped itself into something unrecognizable. All around me were mirrors, tall, black mirrors that stretched into the void, reflecting not just my image but countless others. Twisted versions of myself, versions that never existed, versions that could never exist. Some of them were familiar. The version of me from my childhood, the younger me who had once dreamed of exploration. Others were darker, distorted. Some were wrong, like shadows trying to escape the glass. I staggered back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Each reflection seemed to reach out to me, beckoning me to come closer, to see the truth of what was happening. The voice spoke again, though I could no longer tell if it was the entity or something else entirely. "You see now, don't you? You never came alone. You brought everything with you. Every thought, every dream, every fear." I reached out tentatively to touch one of the mirrors, my fingers brushing against its cold, smooth surface. Immediately, a flood of images assaulted my mind. My life, flashes of moments I had forgotten, of places I had been. But then something else appeared, darkness. Something from the black hole, something not quite human, not quite alive. It stretched, its limbs distorting in unnatural ways as it clawed at the reflection, trying to break free. I pulled my hand back in terror, gasping for air. My heart was hammering in my chest. This wasn't just a hallucination. These were memories, but not just mine. These were the memories of the entity, of them, whatever they were, and they were connected to me now. "You are one with the void," the voice said, now deep and resonant. "And it is one with you." I stumbled backward, my mind racing. My skin tingled as though it was being stretched from within. My body felt wrong, alien. Something was inside me, inside my very thoughts. The entity wasn't just speaking to me. It was inside me, feeding on my fears, my memories. Suddenly, I realized something horrifying. These dark reflections, these twisted versions of myself, they were trying to tell me something. They were trying to warn me, but it was too late. The whispers from the mirrors grew louder, more insistent, and I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around, heart racing. There was no one there. I woke with a start. My body jerked, as though I had been pulled back into my own skin. My surroundings were disorienting. The ship was no longer inside the black hole, or at least I didn't think it was. I was in the same control room I had been in before, but something was off. The lights flickered and buzzed with a faint hum that wasn't there before. I wiped my face, only to realize my hands were shaking. My heart was still racing, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was as if something had changed inside me. I looked around, confused. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination brought on by the black hole? But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The walls of the control room were covered in equations. They weren't just random numbers or symbols. They were the same ones I had seen in my dreams, in the mirrors, the ones I could never quite understand, but knew somehow were important. I reached out to touch one of them, but the moment my fingers brushed against the surface, a sharp pain shot through my skull. My vision blurred, and I stumbled backward. The equations began to swirl in my mind, rearranging themselves, showing me things, impossible things. I saw stars collapsing into themselves, galaxies twisting, and a figure, an entity, standing at the center of it all. It spoke to me again, its voice now more forceful, more insistent. "You are mine now as I am yours. You have awakened the threshold." I gasped, feeling the weight of its presence in my mind. The entity was no longer just a voice. It had become a part of me. I could feel its influence, its pull. The same pull I had felt when I first entered the black hole. "You open the door," it whispered, "and now you cannot close it." The air around me felt thick, suffocating, as though the walls themselves were closing in. I sat frozen in the pilot seat, unable to move, my mind racing with the impossible events that had just unfolded. The black hole was no longer just a cosmic phenomenon. It had changed me. I could feel it inside me, twisting, warping my thoughts, turning everything I knew into something alien. The ship hummed softly, its systems flickering, but it wasn't just the ship that was malfunctioning. It was me. The equations, the ones that had been swirling around in my mind, began to intensify. They weren't just numbers or symbols anymore. They had become a language that I could almost understand, though it felt unnatural, as though I was hearing a conversation in a foreign tongue, but the words were beginning to make sense. Then, I heard it, a whisper, soft at first, like a breath against my ear. I turned sharply, expecting to see someone behind me, but the cockpit was empty. The voice echoed in my mind again, louder this time, more distinct. "You're not alone." My pulse quickened. I hadn't imagined it. The voice wasn't coming from outside the ship, but from within me, from that place I couldn't quite understand, the part of my brain that was now opened by the black hole, by the entity. "They're coming." The words felt like they were carved into my very soul. My hands gripped the controls tightly, knuckles white. I fought to maintain control, but the whispers didn't stop. They were getting louder, and the ship was alive. It was as if the very craft was responding to the presence in my mind. I could feel it vibrating beneath me, resonating with the frequencies of the void. The whisper continued, "You opened the gate." I slammed my fist against the control panel, trying to focus, to push the voice back. But the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger it became. I closed my eyes, but the whisper followed me. It was inescapable. The threshold is only the beginning. The words echoed through my skull. It was as if the black hole had opened something inside me, not just in the fabric of space-time, but within the deepest parts of my own mind. The entity had entered me, and it wasn't just speaking anymore. It was thinking through me. I blinked, and suddenly, the view outside the ship was different. It wasn't the cold, empty void I had seen before. Instead, I was looking through a veil, a curtain between dimensions. I could see shapes, massive, unknowable beings flickering in the distance, their forms shifting in ways that made my stomach churn. They were close now. I could feel them, their presence pressing against the fragile barrier of reality that separated them from me. The entity had shown me the truth. It wasn't just a cosmic force. It wasn't just a black hole. It was a door, a gateway to something far older, far more powerful than anything humanity could have ever imagined. We are waiting. The whisper came again, and this time, I understood. They were coming. The beings, the architects, the ones who had designed the multiverse. They were waiting for me, waiting for the bridge to be completed. But the question burned in my mind. What happens when they cross? The whisper gave no answer, only the sound of something moving in the darkness. Something alive, and I had just opened the door. I couldn't escape it. The whispers had become deafening. Every moment felt like I was teetering on the edge of sanity. The very walls of the ship were warping, the once familiar control panels distorting and twisting into unfamiliar shapes, as if reality itself was trying to reach through to me, dragging me into its grasp. My breath quickened, and my hands trembled on the controls. The ship was no longer responding to my commands. It was following its own, dictated by something far beyond my understanding. The voice within me, the one that spoke of thresholds and gateways, was now louder than ever. Its commands so clear it felt like my mind was no longer my own. They are coming. You will be the bridge. The voice sounded almost amused, as if it knew something I didn't. I tried to force the thought out of my head. No, I was in control. I was still me, wasn't I? But then the ship lurched, sending me crashing into the side of my seat. The force was unreal, and the familiar hum of the ship's engines faltered as the controls blinked out of existence. I grabbed for the emergency thrusters, but they were already engaged, pulling me faster into the heart of the anomaly. The ship accelerated into the blackness at an alarming rate, and I couldn't stop it. And then I saw it. The blackness outside the viewport moved. What had once been an empty void was now teeming with swirling forms, shapes that defied all logic. They were alive, not like anything I had ever imagined. They weren't creatures in the traditional sense. They were more like patterns, ripples in the fabric of space itself, constantly shifting and flowing. I could feel them watching me. Their presence pierced through me like 1,000 needles, prickling my skin, my bones, my very soul. The more I looked, the more the shapes solidified, becoming clearer, strange, geometric beings, their forms folding into themselves, expanding and contracting as if they were playing with the very concept of space. And then, at the center of it all, something big. No, not big, massive. A shape so colossal, so incomprehensible, that it made the black hole itself seem small. It stretched across the horizon, its form shifting like liquid stone, its presence so overwhelming it seemed to consume all light. The ship jolted again, and I gasped for air as if the very atmosphere had thinned. I glanced at the instruments. The readings were all off. The black hole wasn't pulling me in anymore. It was inside the ship now, a part of it, an inescapable part of me. This is it, the voice in my mind whispered, its tone colder now. You've opened the door. They're here. I didn't understand. I couldn't understand. But the terror in my chest grew heavier, suffocating me. The reality of what I had done hit me like a freight train. I wasn't just in a black hole anymore. I was in something beyond it. I was somewhere between worlds, somewhere the universe hadn't prepared me for. I wasn't sure if I was still alive or if I had already crossed into a new reality. "Look," the voice commanded. I turned to the viewport again, barely able to comprehend what I was seeing. The massive shape, the architects or whatever they were, began to move. It wasn't moving like a ship or a creature. It was folding, shifting between realities, phasing in and out of existence. And somehow, in the midst of it all, I could feel it. It felt like me. Like I was becoming one with it. I wasn't just seeing these things. I was becoming part of them. The ship lurched once more, and the lights flickered. The hum of the engines was replaced with a deafening silence, broken only by the whisper in my mind, growing more and more urgent, more demanding. "Join us. Become us." I gripped the armrests of my seat, my hands slick with sweat. The walls of the ship stretched and warped, and I could feel the weight of reality pulling me apart. The next thing I knew, the ship was no longer in motion. The vast void outside had collapsed into something other. The black hole had swallowed me, not just physically, but mentally, pulling my consciousness into a swirling mass of impossible dimensions. I was no longer alone. They were with me, inside me. The overwhelming sensation of being stretched across countless dimensions consumed me. My body felt wrong. I could feel every molecule, every atom vibrating, twisting. It was as though reality itself had shattered, leaving me in a state where the very laws of physics no longer applied. I wasn't sure if I was still inside the ship or if I had left it altogether. The whispers had stopped, but in their place, there was something worse. A deafening silence. The kind of silence that presses against your ears and drowns your thoughts. It was so profound, so deep, that I could almost hear my own heartbeat, louder than ever, as if the rhythm was a signal to something much darker. I tried to move, but my limbs wouldn't obey. They felt heavy, like they were sinking into something thick, viscous, like I was moving through liquid darkness. My eyes darted around, but there was nothing, just emptiness. But then, something changed. The space around me began to distort again, folding in on itself. I blinked, and suddenly, I was standing. Or was I? My legs didn't feel like legs. They didn't feel like anything. They were there, and yet they weren't. I reached out to steady myself, only to realize that my hand, no, my arm, was not the same. It was stretched, elongated, shifting in ways that made no sense. The air itself seemed to bend around me, the space warping, like I was staring into a broken mirror where nothing was as it seemed. "You're here." The voice. It wasn't the entity's voice anymore. It was mine. At least part of it was. I felt the words slip from my mouth before I could stop them, but they didn't come from my own mind. It was as though my body had become a conduit, a medium for something far older, far greater than me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My voice was absorbed into the silence, swallowed by the darkness. I could feel them now. The beings, the architects. They were no longer distant, faded figures. They were here, in the space between my thoughts. Their presence bled into my reality like ink spreading through water, slowly, subtly, but relentlessly. I was no longer just me. Their forms flickered in my vision, always shifting, always changing. They didn't have faces. They didn't have bodies. They were not solid. They were concepts, ideas, shapes that shouldn't exist in our reality. They moved through the very fabric of space, bending and folding it as easily as I would bend a piece of paper. "It has begun." I felt the words in my chest, resonating deep inside, as if my entire being had become a living echo chamber. I didn't understand what was happening, but I could feel it. I was becoming one of them. No, I had already become one of them. I could feel their thoughts twisting into mine, a collective consciousness. My body was no longer a vessel. It was part of something much greater, much older than anything I had ever known. In that moment, I realized that I was no longer simply witnessing the shift. I was part of it. I was part of the change, the merging of realities. My skin was no longer flesh. It was something else. I could see the edges of my form begin to blur, the lines between myself and the void beginning to dissolve. I could feel the walls of the ship, the very fabric of the universe around me, fading into nothing. The threshold is not just a place. It is a time, a moment, a transition. The voice spoke again, clearer now, more defined. The walls of my reality began to collapse. I felt it in my bones, in the very fibers of my being, the pull, the strain, the unraveling. It wasn't just the ship anymore. It wasn't just the black hole. This was something worse. The universe itself was breaking apart around me, bending and twisting as if its very essence was tearing at the seams. I reached out, desperate for something solid, something real to cling to, but my fingers passed through the air like it was water. No, not water, liquid light, swirling and shifting in ways that defied explanation. I couldn't trust my eyes anymore. I couldn't trust anything. The shapes I had seen before, the architects, had surrounded me, but this time they weren't distant. They weren't flickering at the edges of my vision. They were here. I could feel them pressing against my skin, inside my head, inside my very thoughts. It was as though they were becoming me, seeping through my mind like ink in water. The lines between myself and them had dissolved. I was no longer sure what was me and what was them. "It's happening, Miller." The voice, their voice, reached me, but it wasn't just through my ears anymore. It was inside me, surrounding me, wrapping itself around my consciousness like a tight coil. Felt unavoidable. I could feel every word resonate through my body, each syllable carrying a weight that made my chest tighten. The words weren't comforting. They were a declaration, a certainty. The convergence is inevitable. I stumbled back, or at least I tried to. My legs were no longer my legs. I wasn't sure of anything anymore. The space around me continued to shift, to distort, to collapse. I could hear the creaking of the ship, or was it my mind? Was I still in the ship? Was I even still alive? There was no way to tell. The familiar hum of the engines had long faded. The ship's systems were nothing but a distant memory, a faint echo in the back of my mind. The walls of the cockpit were no longer there, replaced by an endless void of shifting geometries, twisted, impossible shapes that folded and unfolded in ways that made my stomach churn. The black hole had pulled me into something more than just a singularity. It had pulled me into the fabric of existence itself. The void wasn't empty. It wasn't just the absence of light or matter. No, it was alive, and it was here. It was consuming me, piece by piece, twisting me into something else. I saw it then, just bore everything shattered. There, in the distance, beyond the veil of shifting space, was a door. But not a door like any I had ever seen. It was a swirling vortex of light, dark energy, and time itself, folding in on itself like the gates of some otherworldly kingdom. It beckoned me, drawing me in with an irresistible pull. I had no choice. My body, my mind, had already crossed the point of no return. Step through, Miller. Couldn't resist. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, but the entity, no, the architects, had already claimed me. I was them. I was part of whatever this was. The door loomed closer. I didn't want to go through, couldn't, and yet I was already moving toward it. My body no longer my own, my mind no longer a sanctuary. I reached out, and just as my hand touched the edge of the swirling portal, the ship, what was left of it, seemed to shudder violently. The walls cracked, the floor buckled, and the very fabric of space around me began to tear. Reality itself was falling apart. But I didn't care. I stepped through, and everything collapsed. I awoke, or at least I thought I did. The darkness was thick, but it wasn't like the darkness I had known before. This wasn't the void of space, nor was it the cold emptiness of the black hole. This was something else, something deeper, more primal. The air around me was heavy, thick with the hum of energies I couldn't begin to comprehend. I felt no solid ground beneath me, but somehow I was standing, or perhaps floating, anchored in a space that bent the laws of physics into an unrecognizable shape. I tried to move, but my body didn't feel like my body anymore. It wasn't made of flesh and bone. It wasn't even made of anything I could name. The very essence of who I was, of who I had been rewritten. I couldn't grasp the feeling, couldn't understand the sensation. I was there, and yet I wasn't. I was something in between, existing in a place that didn't exist, a state that defied reality. But then, something changed. Something flickered in the air, in the very fabric of this strange new place. I saw shapes, shadows, moving in the periphery of my vision. Shapes that didn't belong to any known form of life. They were vast, their presence overwhelming. They didn't have bodies, at least not in any sense that I understood. They were constructs, abstract, ephemeral, stretching across the boundaries of time and space. They were thoughts made manifest. You are here. The voice pierced my mind, not in words, but in concepts, directly, efficiently, flooding me with knowledge I wasn't ready for. The voice was calm, patient, and it felt like the voice of the universe itself, as though everything that had ever been and ever would be was speaking through it. You have crossed the threshold. The words echoed in my mind, but they weren't just words. They were truths, and the weight of them pressed down on me, crushing the remnants of my former self. The truth of what I had become, of what I was meant to become, settled in my bones, in my essence. Suddenly, the shapes around me began to solidify, taking form. One of them, a vast geometric being, moved closer, its body folding in on itself in impossible ways. It didn't walk. It didn't float. It shifted, bending dimensions around it as easily as breathing. It came closer, its presence suffocating, yet strangely comforting. I could feel it in my mind, its awareness touching the very core of my thoughts, understanding everything that had happened, everything that was happening. You are part of the transition now. I didn't know how to respond. I was no longer sure what I was, or if I had the ability to respond at all. My body had been reshaped, rewritten, and the sense of self I had clung to was slipping away with every passing second. The entity that stood before me, or what I could perceive of it, was massive, its form flickering, stretching across multiple planes of existence at once. It seemed to absorb the very fabric of space and time, folding it into new shapes, new realities. There was a purpose to it all. I could feel it deep in my being. The architects weren't just beings of another dimension. They were the builders, the creators, the ones who shaped the very foundations of existence. You have awakened the path. The path? What path? The thought barely crossed my mind before another voice, distant yet intimate, whispered inside my consciousness, as if it were my own. You were always meant to open the door. I understood then. The black hole had not just pulled me into an event horizon. It had pulled me into the unknown, into the heart of something greater, something that I could no longer escape. There was no going back. The truth of it all began to crystallize in my mind. This was not an invasion. This wasn't the end. This was evolution, the convergence of dimensions. I had been chosen, as had Parker before me, chosen to bridge the gap between worlds, chosen to bring forth the architects, the creators, into this reality, where time and space were no longer fixed concepts but malleable, shapeable constructs. But as I stood there, my senses fully open to the impossible, the full weight of it hit me. This wasn't just about me, about us. This was the end of something old and the beginning of something new. I had opened the door, and now there was no turning back. It is time. The air around me shimmered, warping in impossible patterns. My body, no longer my own, flickered in and out of reality, my form stretching and folding as I attempted to comprehend what was happening. The weight of the transformation was unbearable, and yet I felt no pain. It was as if my very consciousness was being absorbed into the fabric of the universe itself. The entities around me, the architects, were no longer distant figures in the corners of my perception. They were here, enveloping me, guiding me, teaching me the deeper truths of the cosmos. Their presence, though massive and incomprehensible, felt familiar in an unsettling way, as though they had always been a part of me, waiting to be unlocked. You are not the first. The voice came from within me, from the space between my thoughts, and it rattled me. It wasn't the same voice I had heard before, not the one that whispered in my mind. This voice was deeper, older, and more commanding. The process has been repeated many times. You are only the latest. I shuddered, unsure of what to make of this revelation. The architects were ancient. They were beyond time and space as I knew it. But what did they mean by not the first? What process had they repeated? Why was I chosen? Why was I here? You were chosen to bridge the gaps. The voice responded, not in words, but in a series of abstract thoughts that tore through my mind like lightning. The truth began to settle in. I wasn't just a participant in this cosmic event. I was an instrument, a vessel for something far greater. The architects had not just found me. They had crafted me, chosen me to act as the bridge between their dimension and mine. You, like the others before you, have opened the threshold. Before I could respond, images exploded in my mind. Flashbacks of the people who had come before me. I saw their faces, their eyes wide with terror and awe. I saw their bodies writhing, changing, their minds bending as they became something else, something not entirely human. I saw them, the ones who had undergone the same transformation, each one stepping through the threshold, each one becoming part of the architect's plan. And then, the most horrifying image of all, the end result. The architects had not simply sought knowledge. They had sought evolution, an evolution that required humans to undergo this transformation. We were not just carriers of their wisdom, we were the key to their survival. You are the next phase. The words rang in my head, but they felt distant. The reality around me bent again, and I found myself inside a vision of another world, another dimension entirely. I could see the architect's home, their world, a vast expanse of geometry and energy, swirling in a beautiful, chaotic harmony that no human I could ever fully comprehend. But something was wrong. The world was decaying. I saw flashes of their reality, fractured, like cracks in a broken mirror. The energy that had once sustained them was fading, collapsing, dying. The architects, once immortal, were on the verge of extinction, and they had chosen us, humanity, to bring them to our reality, to use us as anchors between the dimensions, to feed their essence into our world, where the laws of physics were still stable, where their energy could thrive. We are dying. You are the answer. The revelation hit me with the force of a tidal wave. The architects needed us, not just as conduits for their knowledge, but as saviors. We were the last hope for their species, and in return, we were being changed, rewritten. Our evolution was the price of saving their civilization. I felt my pulse quicken, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Was this the fate of humanity? Would we become nothing more than pawns in an interdimensional game of survival? The architects didn't wait for my answer. Their presence swelled, pushing through the edges of my consciousness. The threshold is closing. You must decide. Will you ascend or remain? I stood at the precipice. The truth was laid bare before me, and I could feel the universe holding its breath. My transformation wasn't just a change. It was the change. The future of both the architects and humanity hung in the balance. I had to choose. The silence enveloped me again, but this time, it felt different. It was oppressive, suffocating. My thoughts raced, tangled in a web of uncertainty and fear. The architect's presence loomed over me, their forms pulsing in the corners of my mind like distant stars, cold and indifferent. They had shown me their world, their decaying reality, and I could feel their desperation, their need for survival. But it wasn't just their survival at stake. It was ours too. The weight of their words pressed down on me, making it harder to breathe. The threshold was closing, and with it, my last chance to decide who I would become, or what I would become. I had opened the door, yes, but did I have the right to walk through it? To embrace the unknown? To give up everything that made me who I was? Will you ascend or remain? The voice, once distant, now echoed through every cell of my body. A deep, resonant tone that sent chills through me. I could feel the pull like gravity, like a magnetic force. The architects needed me. They needed us. Humanity was the last key to saving their dying world, to ensuring their survival. It wasn't just about knowledge anymore. It was about evolution. It was about becoming something greater. But what did that mean for me? What did it mean for humanity? Could we truly transcend our human nature? Could we become part of something so vast, so unimaginable, that it would erase everything we had known and believed? Your consciousness will merge with ours. The voice continued, soothing and cold, like a lullaby sung by a distant star. You will no longer be limited by the confines of your form. You will become us, and we will become you. The words echoed in my mind, like a sweet, intoxicating song. I could feel the pull of it, the lure of the unknown. The architect's promises were seductive. They promised immortality, transcendence, a life beyond the boundaries of time and space. They promised a reality where our consciousness would no longer be confined to mere mortal understanding. But was that what I wanted? Was I ready to give up everything? My humanity, my identity, for a chance at something beyond? I could feel myself changing, my body shifting, my very essence being rewritten. The equations, the whispers, the visions of the architects, they were all flooding my mind, reshaping my thoughts. In the distance, I saw the doorway again, the vortex of light and dark, the swirling mass of energy that called to me. It beckoned, offering answers, offering evolution. But I could feel something else, something faint, something human still within me. An anchor, a tether that held me back. Do not forget who you are. The words came, not from the architects, but from within me, from the part of me that still clung to the memories of my old life, the man I had been before all of this had started. Before the black hole, before the whispers, before the architects. I wasn't just a vessel. I was more than that. I was a human being with a history, with a choice. I took a step toward the door, my mind clouded with uncertainty. Was this the right decision? Could I truly become part of something that transcended all I knew, all I was? But before I could make my choice, the voices in my mind shifted. There is no turning back. The door flickered again, and I felt the last of my resistance crumble. Reality itself seemed to bend around me. The architects were pushing, urging me forward, and the pull was too strong to resist. And then, in a final moment of clarity, I knew. I had no choice. The transformation had already begun. I stepped through. The moment I crossed the threshold, everything shifted. Time and space no longer had meaning. I couldn't tell if I was falling, floating, or standing still. My senses were overwhelmed, as though every part of me was stretched thin, pulled in every direction at once. I was everywhere. I was nowhere. The transformation, the evolution had begun. The walls of reality seemed to fold in on themselves, collapsing into a singularity of light and darkness, where everything and nothing existed simultaneously. And then I saw, not with my eyes. No, I had no body anymore. I was something else now. I was a being of pure thought, a consciousness without form. I saw the architects not as shapes or figures, but as concepts, abstract and shifting like the very fabric of the universe. They weren't beings in the way I understood beings. They were forces woven into the threads of existence itself. Their voices filled my mind, not speaking to me as individuals, but as a collective, a singular intelligence that resonated across dimensions. I could hear them, feel them, become them. You have ascended. The words didn't come from a mouth. They didn't need to. They were simply known, like a universal truth that was understood by every fiber of my being. My consciousness expanded, and the knowledge flooded in. I could see the history of the architects, their rise, their decay, their need for survival. I could see the fractures in their dimension, the unraveling of their existence, the desperation that had driven them to seek out humanity. And I saw their purpose, to evolve, to transcend, to merge with other realities, to be reborn. I understood it all, but that knowledge was a double-edged sword. As I ascended, I realized the architects were not saving us. They were transforming us, remaking us into something that could not be undone. The promise of transcendence came at a cost. We would be their vessels, their bridges, their anchors between worlds. And humanity, my humanity, would no longer exist in the way I knew it. But what was I now? Part of them, yes, but still me. Or was I? My thoughts were becoming fragmented, slipping through my fingers like sand. The line between who I was and what I had become was blurring. And then I saw the others. Parker, Webb, Carver. They were all here, their forms shifting like waves of energy, like ripples in the fabric of reality itself. They had all chosen to ascend, to embrace the architect's vision, to merge with them and become something greater. Their faces flickered in and out of focus, no longer recognizable as the people they had once been. They were more, much more, but at the same time they were less. We are the beginning of the new order. The words echoed in my mind, coming from all of them, from the architects, from the universe itself. I felt it, our transformation, our collective evolution. The architects had succeeded. We had crossed the line, the final threshold. There was no going back now. The universe was no longer just a collection of stars and galaxies. It was a living, breathing organism, and we were its new heart. We were the vessels that would carry it forward into the next phase of existence. The old world, the one I had known, had faded into the past, a distant memory swallowed by the void. We were something more now, but at the same time we were nothing, and that, more than anything, terrified me. I could feel the weight of the architect's gaze, the weight of their expectations. I had chosen to ascend, and in doing so, I had sealed humanity's fate. There would be no more borders, no more limits, only evolution, only the endless merging of worlds and minds. Embrace it. And I did. It was as though the universe had been unraveled, and I, in my new form, was floating at its core. I could feel it, the pulse of existence, the heartbeat of countless dimensions intertwining, collapsing, and rebuilding. The energy coursing through me was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was pure, raw, unfiltered power, an awareness that stretched across the multiverse, touching everything, yet nothing at the same time. But beneath it all, something was wrong. There was a subtle shift, like a crack in the glass of reality. The architects had said we would transcend, that we would evolve, that we would become something greater. But as I drifted through this new existence, I began to feel a terrible sense of dissonance. The unity that had once connected us, the architects Parker, Webb, Carver, and me, was fading. I could feel it in the air, like a tension that hadn't been there before. The transition is unstable. The voice echoed through my mind. Not the architects this time, but something darker, something foreign. The vibration of the words struck me, sending a ripple through the collective consciousness. There was no doubt now something was wrong. The seamless merging of worlds had been disrupted, fractured. I tried to focus, tried to anchor myself in the reality that was no longer my own, but the fabric of this new dimension, the one I had become a part of, was starting to tear. The architects, who had once seemed so grand, so omnipotent, were now mere shadows in the distance. Their once unified presence began to splinter into fragments, each piece flickering like a dying star. I felt it, the fracture. A cold emptiness spread across the space, seeping into the edges of my consciousness, pulling me back to the fear I thought I had left behind. My mind, once so expansive, now felt closed, as though it were confined to a tiny corner of the multiverse. I could hear the whispers again, but this time, they weren't comforting. They were frantic, desperate. "We need to fix this." The voice, the foreign voice, grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't one of the architects. No, this was something else. Something that didn't belong. I felt it in my soul, in my being. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't part of the evolution. It was a parasite, a contagion that had latched onto the transformation, and now it was threatening everything. I could see the architects now, their forms flickering violently in the distance. Their presence was a tangled mass of shapes, broken and incomplete. They were losing themselves, unraveling like a thread being pulled from the fabric of the universe. No! I tried to communicate, but my voice was swallowed by the rift in reality. I was slipping, being pulled between dimensions as the convergence began to collapse inward, creating a spiraling vortex that tore at the very core of my being. I looked around, my senses shifting and expanding. Parker was there, his form more solid than I had ever seen, but even he was beginning to fade, his body twitching, flickering. He was losing himself, just like the architects. His eyes met mine, a silent understanding between us, but his expression was twisted in pain. "We are breaking apart." His voice, once clear and commanding, now trembled with the same fear I felt. We had ascended, but at what cost? Our evolution had become a curse, a process that was never meant to be. The architects had used us, transformed us, but something went wrong. Something we didn't understand. The rift grew larger, the space around us unraveling faster. The walls of reality were no longer walls. They were shattering, collapsing into the void. And then, just as quickly as it all started, a blinding flash of light engulfed us. I didn't know if I was still alive. I didn't know if any of us were. The world, or whatever was left of it, disappeared. I could feel my body, but it wasn't my body anymore. It was like being trapped in someone else's skin, no longer human, no longer even a singular being. I was scattered across the fabric of existence, torn between the dimensions I had touched, forced to exist in countless places at once. My thoughts were fractured, splintered, and I couldn't hold on to any one of them for long enough to understand what was happening. The sensation of being everywhere and nowhere at the same time was overwhelming. The light that had consumed me, the blinding flash, faded, leaving behind a cold emptiness. But it wasn't silence. Oh, no. The silence was louder than anything I'd ever experienced, filled with the faintest echoes of voices that shouldn't have been there. It was a discordant symphony of whispers, each voice seeming to bleed into the next, each one begging for something I couldn't comprehend. I tried to focus, but the more I tried, the more my sense of self shattered. The architects, the beings who had once been my guides, my saviors, or so I had believed, were now lost. Their presence, their once infinite consciousness, had become fractured, like broken glass scattered across the dimensions. And with it, something else, something darker, had taken root. I felt it clawing at me, tugging at the edges of my consciousness, attempting to seize control. It was the parasite, the foreign entity that had latched onto the architect's plans. It wasn't meant to be here. It was never supposed to be part of this process. Yet somehow, it had found its way into the heart of the transformation, feeding on the unraveling reality. It was growing stronger, its influence spreading like a virus, infecting everything it touched. It is too late. The voice came, not from the architects, but from within, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated through every layer of my being. It wasn't the architects speaking anymore. It was something far older, something far more terrifying. I could feel it taking hold. The shift was subtle at first, a momentary flicker, like a ripple on the surface of still water. But then the world around me started to shift. The air grew thick with static, the light began to warp and bend. Time twisted, stretching and snapping, disorienting me, pulling me further from what I had once known. You cannot stop it. The voice grew louder, stronger. I tried to move, to fight back, but my body refused to obey. I couldn't see anymore. I couldn't hear the architect's whispers anymore. There was only this overwhelming presence that sought to drown me, to consume me. And then I saw them, figures, shifting in the distorted space around me. They weren't the architects. They weren't human. They were monstrous, their forms constantly changing, flickering between states of existence I couldn't fathom. I could feel their cold, predatory gaze upon me, examining me, understanding me, tearing through my very essence. You are the bridge, one of the figures spoke, and I could feel its voice press into my mind, twisting it, warping it. But the bridge is broken. The realization hit me like a wave of cold terror. The convergence, the whole purpose of this transformation had failed. What I had become was no longer a bridge, but a fracture. The merging of realities had been corrupted, and now we were all trapped in a space that didn't belong to any of us. The parasite, the force that had infiltrated the architect's plan, was tearing at the seams of reality itself. It had used the architects, used their desperation, and now it was free, feeding on the collapse. I was a part of that collapse. It's too late to save anyone now. I tried to scream, but there was no sound. My voice, my humanity, was slipping away, dissolving into the chaos. The parasite was winning, and with it, the universe itself was on the brink of destruction. Time and space were breaking apart, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I had opened the door, and now it was closing, sealing us all into a dark, fractured reality. And then, there was nothing but the cold darkness, a silence so deep and all-consuming that even the whispers of the architects had vanished. The world, or what was left of it, had finally broken. I could feel it deep in my fractured soul, as the fabric of reality tore apart at the seams. Time and space were no longer linear concepts. The dimensions that had once coexisted peacefully began to collapse into one another, spiraling into a chaotic mess that defied all understanding. What had been a unified transformation, a transcendence into something greater, had spiraled out of control. I was nothing now, just a fading echo of my former self, a shadow lingering in the wreckage of the convergence. The architects, those beings I had once revered, were no more. Their vast intelligence had been fractured, torn apart like paper in a storm. They were scattered, their minds flickering in and out of existence, unable to hold onto their once immense power. They had failed, and in doing so, they had dragged all of us, humanity and themselves, into the abyss. The parasite, the foreign entity that had latched onto the transformation, was feeding, growing, growing stronger with every passing second. It had turned the architect's evolution into a weapon, a destructive force that now threatened to erase everything we knew. What had once been a shared vision of transcendence had become a nightmare, and I had been a part of it. I was no longer in control. Whatever humanity I had left was slipping through my fingers like sand. My thoughts were disjointed, scattered across the endless dimensions I was now trapped in. I could feel myself splitting, my consciousness fragmenting into infinite versions of myself, each one experiencing the collapse differently. Some versions of me still clung to the idea of who I had been, struggling against the pull of the parasite, trying to understand what had gone wrong. Others had long since abandoned any notion of humanity, their minds now consumed by the alien force that had invaded our very existence. But there was one thing I knew: I was alone. The others, the ones who had ascended with me, Parker, Webb, Carver, they were gone. Their forms had dissolved into the chaos, lost in the folds of collapsing space. I could no longer sense their presence. They had become part of the rupture, part of the parasite's growing power. I was the only one left who remembered what had happened, who remembered who we had been. But it was slipping away. "You cannot escape." The voice was distant, not from within me, but from somewhere else, somewhere outside the crumbling boundaries of reality. It was a whisper that reverberated through the emptiness, echoing in every fractured dimension. It was the parasite speaking directly to me, as though it had always known I would be the last one to remain. I tried to move, tried to gather what was left of my consciousness, but it was no use. The collapse had taken root too deep. I could feel the energy around me, a cold, malevolent presence that fed on the unraveling. It wasn't just consuming space and time, it was consuming us, all of us, the architects and humanity alike. There would be nothing left when it was done. No traces, no remnants, just the void. The temperature dropped. The very air I breathed seemed to shudder, as if reality itself was gasping for breath. I could see it now, the rift that had formed, the rupture between worlds, between dimensions. It was widening, pulling everything toward it, threatening to consume it all. And I was still caught in the middle of it, unable to do anything but watch as the final moments of existence unfurled before me. I wanted to scream, but there was no sound. My voice was gone, lost in the infinite darkness that stretched before me. And then, just as I felt my mind begin to collapse entirely, the rift pulsed once, violently, as if it had reached its breaking point. It was then that I understood. The parasite wasn't just ending us, it was ending everything. The architects had been right. The convergence was supposed to be the future. But not like this, not in this way. And with that realization, I felt the final fracture tear through my being. The end was here. The collapse was complete. The collapse had consumed everything: time, space, reality, until there was nothing left but the cold, infinite void. I could feel it now, the utter absence of existence. A place where nothing was real, and yet everything was all too real. It was a strange, paradoxical sensation, like standing at the edge of oblivion, unable to look away from the abyss as it swallowed everything I had ever known. My consciousness flickered, hanging on the edge of total dissolution, a whisper among the shadows of a collapsing universe. But then, something shifted. I could feel a pulse, a tiny, almost imperceptible beat against the vast emptiness. It was as if something deep within the void had stirred, the faintest echo of a thought, a life, a being. It was a spark of consciousness, far away but undeniably there. I couldn't tell if it was my own mind attempting to hold on to something, anything, or if it was another presence, another part of me, that had somehow survived the fracture. "You are still here." The voice, distant and muffled, rang through my mind. It was calm, reassuring, but tinged with something unfamiliar. A sense of finality, I couldn't reply. My body, my essence, what was left of it, wasn't my own anymore. The parasite had taken so much from me. But the voice, it felt like a memory, a familiar presence from before the rupture. Felt like hope. You must remember. The words were sharp, cutting through the fog of my thoughts like a knife. I didn't know who it was speaking to me, but the command was clear. There was something I had to remember, something vital, something buried deep beneath the layers of chaos and transformation. I tried to focus, to dig through the remnants of my fractured consciousness. My memories were fading, slipping further away with every passing moment. But there was something I couldn't let go of, something that had to survive this collapse. The architects, I thought, but it wasn't a word. It was a feeling, a connection, a bond with something larger. They had tried to evolve humanity, to elevate us, but they had miscalculated, failed, and let their desperation consume us all. They had brought us here. But what now? A flash of light erupted in my mind, blinding and sudden, filling every corner of the void with brilliance. I felt my thoughts split open, memories, fragments of my old self flooding back in waves. I remembered the moment I first touched the anomaly, the fear and awe as the threshold opened. I remembered the architect's promise of transcendence, of becoming something greater. I remembered the others, Parker, Webb, Carver, each of them, each of us, stepping into the void. We had all been pulled into something that we couldn't escape, something that wasn't meant to happen. But then, the connection deepened. You are the last. The voice echoed again, stronger this time. There was a certainty to it, a knowing. I wasn't just any human anymore. I was the last thread of humanity, the last one left to hold on to the truth. The architects had failed, yes, but I had survived this collapse. I was the final remnant, the one who would remember. But what was I supposed to do with that knowledge? The void around me stretched infinitely, an endless sea of nothing. I couldn't tell where I ended and the world began. I was part of it all, but I was also apart from it, an observer in a shattered universe. It is not the end. The words came again, this time clearer, louder, reverberating through the infinite darkness. It wasn't the end. There was something more, and somewhere, far beyond the grasp of the fractured reality, something stirred, a promise of rebirth, a new beginning, and I was the only one who could bring it. I was no longer sure if I was alive or dead. My perception of reality had dissolved into a series of fractured images, fleeting moments that seemed to stretch across infinite timelines, like memories of a life I never lived. I floated in a place where time didn't exist, where space was a mere illusion. I was a spectator to my own transformation, watching, helpless, as the last remnants of humanity, of who I had been, faded away. But then, something changed. A pulse. It wasn't physical, but it was there. A rhythmic thrum deep in the very core of my being. A heartbeat, but not my own. It was the universe's heartbeat, the architect's heartbeat. They were gone, yes, but they had left behind an imprint, a trace of their presence that still echoed in the fabric of existence. I could feel it reverberating through me, threading its way into the broken remnants of my consciousness. Wake up! The voice. It wasn't the architects. It wasn't the parasite. It was something other, something that had always been there, waiting, watching, guiding. The presence was familiar, like an old friend who had been lost to time, only to return when I had reached my most desperate hour. Wake up before it's too late. It was a command, simple, unwavering, and yet it felt like a plea, a desperate cry from the depths of the void. It was calling me back, pulling me toward something, toward purpose. I tried to fight it, the pull, the need to respond, but my will was fading, slipping away, as if the very essence of my being was dissolving into the vast nothingness. I had no body, no form, But the voice called again, louder this time. Remember who you are. The words ignited something deep within me, something that had been dormant, buried beneath layers of transformation. I remembered before. I remembered the man I had been, the soldier who had stepped into Area 51 with uncertainty and fear. I remembered the fear of the unknown, the dread that gripped me as I entered the black hole, not knowing that I would never return the same. I remembered Parker, Webb, Carver, the people I had lost in this transformation. They had succumbed to the chaos, to the pull of the architects, to the parasite. But I was different. I had survived, even when everything had crumbled. Even when the universe itself had torn apart, I had survived. And that was something the architects had failed to account for. The pulse grew stronger, more insistent. I felt my essence, my consciousness, being drawn to something, to someone. I knew it then. The architects had been wrong. They had failed in their pursuit of transcendence, of evolution. Their vision had been clouded by desperation. But I had seen the truth. We were not meant to transcend into something beyond humanity. We were meant to preserve it, to protect it from forces that sought to tear it apart. I could feel my mind shifting again. The veil of nothingness was lifting. The whispers faded. The parasite that had once consumed me began to wither, its hold weakening, dissolving like smoke in the wind. No more. The finality of it struck me. I was reclaiming my humanity. I was standing at the crossroads between worlds, between the collapse and the rebirth. And I knew what I had to do. It was clear now. I had to repair the rift. I had to rebuild what the architects had broken. For the first time since I had crossed the threshold, I felt my hands, my real hands, solid beneath me. I was whole again, and this time, I was in control. The universe may have broken, but I would be the one to rebuild it. The moment I regained control, I knew it wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't about escaping the chaos, the collapse, or the transformation that had torn me apart. No, this was about something else, something greater than myself. The power to restore, to rebuild what had been broken, was now in my hands. And the weight of that responsibility settled over me like an unshakable force. The void, the fractured reality, still swirled around me in disorienting waves. But with each passing moment, I felt it beginning to stabilize. The rift, the breach between dimensions, was still there, a gaping wound in the very fabric of existence. But I could feel it weakening, its power beginning to fade. The architects, who had once been the creators of this catastrophe, were gone. Their plans had failed. And now it was up to me to fix what they had destroyed. I could feel the energy coursing through me, not as a foreign force, but as a part of who I was. It wasn't the architect's power or the parasite's. It was mine, a fusion of everything I had been, everything I had learned, and everything I had become. And in this moment, I realized that my survival wasn't just a fluke. It was part of the plan. I had been chosen not to ascend, but to anchor this reality, to stabilize the rift, to mend the tears in space and time. You are the bridge. The words echoed in my mind again, this time not as a command, but as a truth. I understood now. I wasn't just a tool for the architect's designs. I was the final line of defense, the last tether holding the universe together. The architects had intended for us to transcend, to evolve beyond humanity, but their vision had been flawed. Humanity's strength was in its imperfections. It was in our ability to choose, to fight against the darkness. I was the last human, yes, but I was also the first of something else, a new beginning. I extended my awareness, reaching out with my mind, feeling the threads of the fractured universe. The dimensions that had bled into one another began to separate, slowly, carefully. It wasn't a violent process. It was a delicate, measured unweaving. I could feel the ruptured fabric of reality knitting itself back together, one stitch at a time. The chaos began to subside, the distorted, shifting landscapes turning stable, solid again. But there was a price, a sacrifice. I could feel the energy in my body beginning to drain, as though I were giving everything I had to keep the rift from tearing open again. The transformation, the evolution I had undergone, had given me the power to mend reality. But I could not hold it forever. The price of this restoration was my own dissolution. I had become something new, something more, but to hold this reality together, I would have to let go of everything I had become. The thought terrified me, but I knew it was the only way. I focused on the rift, guiding it with every ounce of energy I had left. I could feel the last fragments of the architect's influence fading, replaced by something human, something that chose to protect, to rebuild instead of destroy. The rupture began to close, the dimensions folding back into place as I sealed them with a final, resolute act of will. And then it was done. The universe was stable again. The rift was sealed. Time and space once again followed their natural course. I could feel my own body, my mind, my consciousness starting to disintegrate, the price of holding everything together. But it wasn't pain. It was peace, as if I was returning to where I belonged. I took one last, deep breath, and then I faded into the void, knowing that I had fulfilled my purpose. I had restored the balance. The universe had been saved. And in the end, the bridge had become the foundation of a new beginning.